Let's talk
about our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell, I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony, where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.
Welcome, and we're glad to have you on The Talk Vermont, a program that addresses the joys and concerns and interests of people of color and other marginalized communities in the state. As we approach the midterm elections, especially here in Vermont, we want to invite major elected officials and people running for offices to join us so that they can share their interests and concerns, and you can offer your concerns and questions for them. And we have today, I'm pleased to welcome the Present Lieutenant Governor, John Rogers, and in October we will welcome the former Lieutenant Governor who's running for office. Her name is Molly Gray. And so, Mr. Rogers, please call me Arnold, by the way.
Okay.
I am so glad to have you here, and I should also let you know that Mr. Rogers came into office in 2025 after a 2024 election in which Republicans gained a lot of seats in both the House and the Senate. Mr. Rogers, it's good to have you with us. Let's begin by you sharing a bit about yourself.
Sure. I grew up on a dairy farm in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and was really taught a few very basic things by my parents and grandparents. I had the joy of growing up in a household with 3 generations in it, so lived with my grandparents. But really, honesty, be polite, and a strong work ethic. And so when I was growing up on the dairy farm, I did chores before I went to high school. I did chores when I got back from high school. I did chores on the weekends and worked on the farm all summer. And when I had spare time, I worked on other farms to make a little extra cash. So we worked very hard on the farm. And then when I was in my 20s, I started my own masonry business, doing mostly brick and block work, largely chimneys and fireplaces. That business slowly evolved into what I do now is stonework and excavation, mostly dry stonework, a lot of historic restoration, restoring foundations under old post and beam barns and houses, which is some of my favorite work, saving those old masterpieces. But because that was seasonal, I also did snow plowing, I managed my own forest. We have several other small businesses. And my first elected position was as the collector of delinquent tax in the town of Glover.
Oh.
Not a highly sought after job, but something that needed to be done, and it wasn't being done well, so I did that for a while, and then I was elected to the House of Representatives in 2003, served there for 3 years, and then took 2 years off and got elected to the state Senate, and I served there for 8 years, and then 4 years off, and I decided to get back in, mainly driven by the excessive growth in the cost of living and my fear that my children and grandchildren and their peers weren't going to be able to have a life here.
Who would you say were some of the individuals that highly influenced your life?
It would really start mostly with my father and grandfather. Being on the farm, you were together all the time, working together. playing together. And the interesting thing about my family is that though we worked very hard, both my grandfather and my father were jokers, which I picked up. I've actually done some stand-up comedy.
Oh my goodness.
You may not know. But we had a lot of fun while we were working. And one of my favorite things about my grandfather is that you'd have a day where you were doing farm work and it started raining, and he would say, "It's too wet to work, let's go fishing." And so much of our free time was spent hunting and fishing and out in nature, which I still love today.
Great. I should let the viewers know that if you have questions to ask of the Lieutenant Governor, you can call in, and the number to call is 802-862-3966, 802-862-3966. Now you were, until 2024, you were a member of the Democratic Party.
Absolutely, 58 years of my life.
Wow. Tell me what caused you to change?
Yeah, it was a tough decision for me, but while I was out of office in 2023, property taxes went up 13%. In 2024, they went up 14%. The Democrats had a supermajority at that time. They raised another $100 million in the payroll tax, and they proposed to tax people's heating fuels hundreds of millions of dollars, all things that I didn't think Vermonters could afford, working class Vermonters. And I'm a working class guy. I have always, throughout my legislative career, stood up for the working class people. And so at that point, I just felt like the Democrats in the legislature had failed to take care of the working class people that I think are the foundation of the state of Vermont. And I saw Governor Scott and some of the other moderate Republicans standing up for those values and pushing back against some of those costs. And it was an extremely tough decision because though I believe in Governor Scott and those other moderates that I joined, and I've been warmly embraced by them. We share many, many values. At the same time, we had President Trump in the White House, who I strongly disagree with on many, many things. So it was very hard to put an R beside my name, but I think what people in Vermont have been really good at understanding is that Vermont Republicans are much different. In fact, we're the only state in the country that voted for Nikki Haley. And you know, both the governor and I have pushed back on many things the Trump administration has done. I have stood with immigrants and actually helped keep some migrant farm workers in the country with my support. And you know, I was the only Republican in the entire country to speak at a hands-off rally. And when I spoke, I called out some of the things that I disagreed with the president on, but I also called for the Republican leaders in Congress to do their job. They were elected to be leaders, and when the Trump administration is going in the wrong direction, those Republicans failed to stand up to him.
Tell me a little bit more about what separates Vermont Republicans from, let's say, MAGA Republicans of the Trump administration?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't even think MAGA is Republican. I think it's something totally on its own. When I think about Republicans, I think about Lincoln Republicans, right? I think about the folks who had concerns about equity and affordability and taking care of the working class. I think both parties have gotten away from their core mission, and I think the primary election system is fatally flawed to elect people from the left and the right. When I first got involved in politics in 2003, there were many moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats that were very, very similar, and we actually had the numbers to control the House of Representatives. It was pretty evenly balanced, and us moderates and a few independents could swing the vote either way. And the old joke when I was growing up is the only difference between a Republican and a Democrat is the time of day they milk their cows. That ship has sailed, and it's not so anymore. But old school Vermont Republicans and Vermont Democrats agreed on most stuff, and they worked for Vermonters. Now the nation has become so polarized, and they don't seem to do a single thing for Americans, for regular working class Americans. It's all about making each other look bad, and every one of their policies, and this is going back through quite a few administrations, not just the Trump administration, but they have continued to concentrate the wealth and allow the super wealthy big tax breaks, while more and more regular people are suffering, while they're cutting Medicaid, while they're cutting food aid to hungry people. And in the richest country in the world, nobody should go without health care, and nobody should go without food.
Again, if you have any questions you wish to ask Lieutenant 862-3966. Now, even as a Democrat, you didn't always toe the party line. There were some issues that that you fought for. I don't think they went through, but let's just retrace some of those issues. You represented, you were opposed to, for instance, gun control, opposing the bill that would be used. You also opposed, you also promoted a bill that would bar cell phones until the age of 21. Mm-hmm. Okay, now tell me about those decisions, how you feel about them now.
Sure, there's a can of worms right there. So I, am a strong supporter of the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I supported red flag laws to take firearms away from dangerous people. People who've been deemed dangerous to themselves or others shouldn't have firearms. So that is clear. I support background checks. I want to make sure everyone who has a firearm has been background checked, and we're certain that they don't have a crime that makes it so they're not supposed to have one. So I think that's imperative. But I also grew up in a very rural community and setting where we had firearms. Back in the day, you had gun racks and gun cases that actually displayed your firearms because nobody was worried about somebody stealing them or somebody shooting another person, right? When I was in high school, I distinctly remember a whole bunch of us boys that hunted would bring our rifles to school during deer season, and half the cars and trucks that the rifles were in probably weren't even locked. And at lunchtime, we would literally go out and talk about deer hunting stories and show each other what we hunted with. Because at that time, nobody ever thought of committing an act of violence. Mm-hmm. So it has evolved because the world has evolved, but I want to make sure we keep them out of the hands of dangerous people and that law-abiding citizens still have the right to keep and bear arms, which I think is a very, very important part of the Constitution.
Now, okay, correct me though if I'm wrong. My understanding of gun control is not to take away the guns, but to make sure that they're registered so that people who are like having, in a sense, a license to drive a car. You have a license to own a gun. People know, or at least the administrators, the government knows who you are, what the government, what the gun, who the gun is registered for, and who's accountable for whatever acts you do with that weapon.
Well, and I think that's what the background check is for, that if the background check is working properly, nobody who's not supposed to have a weapon will have it. But I would say, from my perspective, it's similar to the Trump administration asking for our voter rolls and other personal information. How much information do you want the Trump administration to have on you? And I guess I would argue that government should not be that intimately involved in our personal life. And quite frankly, with AI and all the big data companies collecting data on us, I'm a little bit worried about everybody's individual rights. And privacy right now. And so I am very skeptical of giving the government too much information about us, quite frankly, based on what the Trump administration has done to, quite frankly, trample the constitutional rights of many Americans. I guess I wouldn't want an administration like that to have any more information on me than they need.
Tell me about the cell phone.
Yeah, so from my perspective, we were having all the gun debates, and I think one of the most dangerous thing for our young people right now is screen time and access to the internet. There are great things on there, right? Great educational opportunities, but there are also groups trying to radicalize kids. There's adult content that kids shouldn't be getting to. All these kids, they're so good at electronics, they can find their way onto the dark web. There's all sorts of things that they shouldn't do. One of the most concerning is bullying, right? And there's a massive amount of bullying going on. And endless scrolling, right? Which is, I think, proven bad for the mind. We have so many kids that are suffering with mental illness and other things like that. I really believe that until their brain is fully developed, there should be more restrictions. And that bill was simply to try to get a conversation going about what should the limits be. I heard one great story a few months ago when a school took away the kids' phones and started making them put them in those little bags when they got to school. A couple days later, they were playing kickball. Now that's what I did when I was a kid. I don't know what you did, but at recess we went out and we got a game of kickball or softball or basketball going, and that's what we did. And that's what kids need to be doing, not scrolling through junk.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder, even if at 21, we're responsible enough with our phones. And I'm aware of the recent controversy regarding the addictive use of cell phones. Yeah, and so that's an issue that will continue to play itself out.
Yes, sir.
Now, Vermont is one of 17 states where the governor and lieutenant governor do not run on the same ticket, creating a situation where two offices may represent different parties. I believe that Governor Scott, a Republican, served as lieutenant governor under Governor Shumlin, a Democrat. How do you feel about that arrangement?
It's a bit odd. I'm perfectly comfortable with it. You know, it's gone both ways. Governor Douglas had Lieutenant Governor Doobie under him. Governor Scott's had a couple of Democrats under him. You know, it does seem that it might be better if they ran together, because I think the executive branch should be able to try to balance the legislative branch. And that's what I love about working with Governor Scott, is that we provide that balance, because you know, both houses of the legislature are controlled by the Democrats. And I'm a person that believes in balance. You know, as you can tell from my history, being a Democrat that now serves as a Republican, I'm not sure I fit in either party. And so I believe in balance, and I believe with working with people who have ideas that will help Vermonters. And so in my office, I tell everybody I have an open door policy. Representative Brian China's in my office all the time, one of the more liberal people from this area. Representative Krasnow is in my office all the time. I work with very many liberal people on issues that some people would consider liberal. But the one thing that I'm super proud of is changing that office from an office that has been a ceremonial position for many years that people were using to try to move to the next level, and I've turned it into one of the hardest working offices in state government. And we've had many people stop by the office and say, we've never seen a lieutenant governor's office get this much work done, and that makes me very proud.
Good, good. You mentioned the role of the lieutenant governor. Let me explain that a little bit more for the viewers especially. Your role as lieutenant governor includes presiding over the Vermont Senate, casting a tie-breaking vote when needed, assuming the governor's duties when he is out of the state or is incapacitated, and more informally, convening opportunities for Vermonters to publicly discuss important issues. In your role as president of the Senate, you provided a tie-breaking vote that sent what was allegedly a Trump-endorsed U.S. attorney, Michael Drescher, who led the Trump's administration's prosecution and detentions of 2 immigrant students, activists, who had spoken out against the war in Gaza, to serve as on this Vermont Supreme Court. Now, I'm sure that was a very controversial move. Critics questioned whether he would protect the rights of Vermonters given his role in this unsuccessful case. Can you share your thoughts as to the reasons why offering that tie-breaking vote?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I reject that premise that many people in the public have stated. Would you think President Obama would support a Trump lawyer? This is the thing a lot of people don't know. Michael Drescher has had a long career in public service. He served under Bush, he served under Obama, he served under Trump, and he served under President Biden. Now, President Biden had put him on a short list of lawyers to go for consideration to the federal bench. So that in and of itself tells me he's not a Trump lawyer. I served on the Judicial Nominating Board for 6 years, and I know that no one who makes it through that board is unqualified. And that is people from all parties on there, but I have never, in my 6 years on that, seen that board be partisan. And so there were Democrats on that board that supported Michael Drescher. Then the governor appointed him out of all the people the Judicial Nominating Board sent up. That would give me more faith that he was a good lawyer. And then when it came to the Senate floor, I wouldn't have had to break the vote if it was Republicans against Democrats. There are 17.
There were actually two Democrats who voted for
And
Drescher.
so there are 2 liberal Democrats from Bennington who are supporting my opponent, in public, endorsing my opponent, who voted in favor of Michael Drescher. They're both lawyers. They both spent a lot of time with him, as did I spend over an hour with him on the phone. And so from my perspective, interviewing him and talking with people who have known him, he is actually a liberal lawyer and was totally mischaracterized. And the other thing it says in that statement is he prosecuted. He did not prosecute, and that's another bit of misinformation that's being floated in the public. He defended. Those 2 individuals who, quite frankly, I think if we're going to cast blame, it should be on the people who arrested them, which I do believe was unjust. I actually did meet and talk with Mohsen Madawi. But another thing that a lot of folks don't know is that when Ramada Ostra was getting ready to be released, the feds tried to put an ankle bracelet on her, and that wasn't part of the judge's order. And when Mr. Drescher found out, he instantly got hold of that judge and made them take that ankle bracelet off it. So as a member of the Judicial Nominating Board, I had the privilege of interviewing Jeffrey Crawford, who served on the Vermont Supreme Court for some years and then moved up to the federal bench. Now, I saw a statement from Jeffrey that said Michael did a good job with an extremely hard case. And Jeffrey Crawford went to his swearing in. This is one of the, I believe, the sharpest legal minds in the state. Another sitting Supreme Court justice thanked me for my vote on Michael Drescher and said that I had done the right thing. And it was a shame that there was so much misinformation, and this guy did not deserve that abuse. So I would just want the public to know that President Obama supported him, President Biden supported him, 2 Democrats in the Senate supported him. And I think anyone who was informed on his history of service would support him.
That's interesting information, and it makes me wonder why then the controversy regarding his appointment, and mainly because in light of that appointment, along with an earlier appointment, of which you may be aware of, Jennifer Barrett, to the Vermont Superior Court, whose husband was actually released as a state patrol officer because he was accused of unlawful searches and that targeted people of color. So black and brown Vermonters remain concerned about their safety in light of at least the controversy surrounding Drescher's appointment. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I think because of the circumstances, because as I said earlier, I think both of those two, Mosen and Miss Oster, were both unfairly targeted and arrested. So I share their concern, and I think everybody should be held accountable, and if a police officer is doing that kind of thing, they should be held accountable. Look, I grew up in a very white community. I remember growing up, there was one person of color that I knew, Mr. Wood, that lived in Barton. But my kids were fortunate enough to grow up with a whole bunch of people of color because a bunch of the families in our area had adopted kids and some new families had moved in. And so, you know, those kids were treated as my own. I coached them as I coached my kids. Often in the morning, I would have 12 boys from the soccer team sleeping in sleeping bags on the floor of my house, and I'd get up and be a short order cook and get them all fed up and off to the game on Saturday. So, you know, there's a lot of folks in Vermont that didn't grow up with any diversity. We had no diversity here, and I embrace it. My mother's family came from France in the 1600s and landed in Canada and migrated down to the US only a generation ago. So my mother was the first generation French Canadian to be born here. And you know, I can't compare apples to apples abuses, but they suffered discrimination when they first came down.
Especially under eugenics laws.
Absolutely. And you know, I do a lot with the Native Americans, the Abenaki tribes here in the state. And, you know, I think we have to own that. And if we want to do better in the future, we have to make sure we're teaching history, right? Real history. I never heard of the Tulsa massacres when I was in school, right? That's a pretty big chapter to skip. I think we need to make sure kids are educated on the Holocaust and the other genocides that have gone on around this country and the mistreatment of African Americans and indigenous Americans. And if we don't teach that history well, we're in danger of repeating some of the mistakes.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We've already discussed the relationship of the Republican Party in Vermont with the Trump administration. There are mixed views regarding, I would imagine, Republicans, how they affiliate and see the Trump administration and relate to the Trump administration. Would you consider the Republican Party in Vermont either lukewarm as far as the Trump administration is concerned? There are supporters as well as detractors. How would you describe?
Well, it's a mixed bag, and I've actually got some Republicans that throw stones at me all the time. I'll give you an example. Put a team together, raised a bunch of money for Special Olympics, and went and jumped in the ice-cold lake, right? And my chief of staff put that on our page, just giving Special Olympics a shout out, and we had people throwing stones at us for doing something that nice because I'm a horrible person because I don't like Trump. So there are people that are, you know, just serious Trumpers, and it's a litmus test, right? If you don't agree with the president, they're not going to support you no matter what. And it goes all the way to the other side of the spectrum, and there are Republicans that can't stand him, and then there's some in between. So it really is a big tent. And you know, I'm not a partisan person. When I was a Democrat and I thought Democratic leadership was wrong, I spoke out against them. And now that I'm a Republican, if a Republican's wrong, I'm going to speak out against them. My main focus is Vermonters. I try to stay out of that national stuff because it is such a mess. We need to focus on Vermonters. How do we make sure our kids and grandkids can stay here? That we have a good education system, that when they come out of that education system, they can get a good job here and live the American dream. They need to be able to make enough money to see themselves buying a house so they can build equity and intergenerational wealth and have a family and live a quality life here in Vermont. And right now, our kids are leaving. We're the second oldest state in the country, and if we don't change those demographics, we're in trouble.
One bill that was brought before both the Senate and the House concerned a wealth tax. It didn't go through.
Right.
What were the concerns, and how did you feel about that?
Yeah, so that is controversial. Number one, I would point out we're the third highest overall taxed in the country, which is a bad place to be. A new report just came out this summer that said we are at the bottom of the barrel, number 50 out of 50 for economic opportunity. So talking about proposing new taxes, I don't think is the best thing to do right now. We don't have that many people that fit in that category. And if there is going to be that kind of tax, frankly, I think there should be more taxes on corporations and people who have a ton of money at the federal level. The problem with implementing it here is most of those people already have a house somewhere else. And I'll tell you, I've been going through a call list of my supporters from 2 years ago, and it's shocking how many of them live in Florida today. They said, nope, I didn't want to pay the taxes. I'm getting close to retirement, or I've retired. Vermont has one of the highest tax rates in the country. I moved to a state that doesn't tax my income. And so I went down and toured the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Burlington the other day. What a wonderful place. Got to play tennis with the kids. It was glorious. I told them I wish my whole campaign could be playing tennis with the kids. But toured it with Billy Bissonnette, and they showed me a new facility, classrooms and offices that was totally donated by philanthropy. And so if those people don't live here, they're not going to do philanthropy here. And my question has always been, how many of them will leave? Because I know a lot of them have left, and when they leave, they do their philanthropy wherever they are. And so if we want those opportunities, I think we have a fairly progressive income tax structure here in the state, and I think everybody needs to pay their fair share. But I think anytime you start targeting one class or one person, I think it puts us in a bad position.
Do you feel that the working class Vermonter is still overburdened by taxes and property, and not enough emphasis is being placed upon the more wealthy Vermonters? Well,
so I'll give you an example. 66% of Vermonters pay their property tax based on their income. They get some sort of rebate or prebate. And so the property taxes for folks who make more income are not income sensitized. So I've talked with a couple folks lately that would probably be close or in that higher income bracket that have big, beautiful houses here around Chittenden County. And one of them told me he's paying $40,000 a year in property taxes. Another one told me he's paying $70,000 a year in property taxes. Now, from my perspective, even as a working class person, I mean, my property taxes are high, but not that high. How much more should you ask that person to pay for property tax to live in a house that they've bought and paid for? Can they afford it? Well, maybe they can afford it, but $70,000 a year? which is supposed to go for, roads and bridges in the town and providing school. That's an awful lot of money on top of income tax and all the other taxes we have. And I'm afraid if we keep raising those, that none of those folks will live here in Vermont. They might still have a house here, but they will claim their residency somewhere else. They will do their philanthropy somewhere else. I have a very liberal friend who has a foundation and does a huge amount of good work with her money. And she came into my office and she said, it's not just about people like me, she said, that will have to pay it. She's also on the board of the hospital and said, we're already having a hard time drawing surgeons and oncologists and the physicians that we need here, and they would be in that bracket. Mm-hmm. And so there are a whole bunch of issues surrounding it. And, quite frankly, many of the issues that we're struggling with today are driven by a federal government that for most of my lifetime has been irresponsible. They mandated special education and said they would fund it. They never funded it. We're the only industrialized country in the world that doesn't have some sort of government-funded universal health care. We can't do it in Vermont. There is no way. The Shumlin administration did the work. Peter Shumlin was a very smart guy, surrounded by very smart people, and one of the savviest politicians I ever knew. He did the math. He said it can't be done. I believe it. We're too small a population. We're too old a population. It's something that needs to be done on the national level. I've seen reports, and I believe this, that we spend more tax dollars per capita on health care than any country that has a universal health care, but we only provide it for 30% of our population.
So you would be in favor of a Medicare for all?
Of a federal, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the most disgusting things to me is that Congress gets the best health care in the country,
That's
and
right.
they haven't fixed our health care problem.
Well, in your capacity to convene public forums to hear and address matters of interest and concern to Vermonters, I would imagine issues related to financial affordability of residents, housing, health care, education, employment, and public safety loom high on the list, especially in light of Vermont's increasingly aging population, as you already had mentioned, and the difficulties young families encounter in being able to afford the cost of living in our state. In 2016, Governor Scott set a goal of boosting the state's economy by increasing state populations up to 700,000 residents. Within 10 years, hopefully accomplishing that within 10 years of when he was elected to office, and encouraging young people who come to study in the state to remain after graduation. Now, during the pandemic, we saw an increase of people out of state coming to Vermont as a kind of ecological refuge haven. However, in the past 2 years, Vermont has suffered a loss of residents, partly due to the cost of living in our state and partly due to the suppression of migrants coming from other countries to this state. How might you, the Scott administration, and Republican leaders, along with the rest of the State House, turn that trend around?
Sure. First off, we need partners in the legislature, because no matter who the governor is, the governor doesn't write legislation. The governor proposes, and then the legislature has their way with it, right? So we need partners in the legislature. But to the migrant workers, I grew up on a dairy farm. I'm very close to the farming community. Our farmers depend on those migrant workers. They become part of the family. And once again, our federal government has failed to build an immigration system that either allows them to become residents or allows them to work here for a period of time. I talked with one farmer in my area that told me, if ICE shows up at my farm and takes my workers, my cows are gone the next day. I cannot do it. We had one incident you may remember, I think it was 2 summers ago now, up in Franklin County, where 8 farm workers were picked up by ICE. And the farmers instantly panicked because that was a major portion of their workforce. So I called Will Lembeck over at Migrant Justice and said, Will, what can we do? He said, sometimes if you write a letter of support, when we go to court and show that to the judge, if there's leadership in the state supporting them, it goes a long way to helping them stay here. So I drafted a letter. I got 29 out of 30 senators to sign on and support that letter, and we got it right back to Will. We weren't able to keep them all in the country, but we were able to get some of those folks back to that farm, back to their job. And so those are the kind of things that I can do from my office. And we've convened many different folks and many different groups in that office, and it's turned into bills that we have passed and moved. And so, yeah, it's super rewarding when you can actually do something in that office that affects someone's life in a positive way.
One of the concerns that I'm sure you're aware of is that Vermont residents of all ethnic communities, but especially, again, immigrant and black and brown Vermonters are concerned about their safety and what role the state is taking in trying to intervene in some ways and maybe in some ways impede the Trump administration from coming in and taking migrants who, as you mentioned, are vitally needed in,
Yes.
in many farm communities. What mechanisms are in place to assure immigrants that their safety is here?
Yeah, well, I think both Governor Scott and I have been outspoken on this, and like I said, when I hear about an issue, we try to address it in the best way that we can, but we've made sure that law enforcement isn't providing help for people to round up. You know, I don't think anybody would disagree that if there is a violent, dangerous immigrant, that's okay to round them up. But targeting people who are working on farms and working on construction sites and working in restaurants,
Or students.
Right? Absolutely. Targeting them is just so wrong because their employers love them. They're part of the community. They're paying taxes. They're good citizens. And it's like we have to get the federal government to address the shortcomings in the immigration policy, and that's another disturbing thing. You know, there was a bipartisan movement in the White House before Trump was elected, and he pushed back on it, and unfortunately the Republicans in Congress sided with him, and they sunk it. And it's just something that's been put off for too long, and it needs to be addressed.
Again, if there are any viewers who have any questions to raise, I've been raising some of the questions that I've heard from them, and I appreciate. In the final few minutes that we have, I really would like to hear from you. Is there anything you would like the viewers to know about you, John Rogers, Lieutenant Governor, that hasn't already been shared?
Yeah, well, you know, I think one thing people might find interesting is that I have a daughter-in-law of color and 2 grandsons. Mm-hmm. And my son went away to the Navy when he was 18 and met a wonderful woman from Florida. And we are so happy that they just moved back to Vermont. So our grandchildren are a couple miles down the road from us. And so they were both in the Navy, and they lived just outside they were in Hawaii for 6 years and then lived just outside of DC. And she worked in the White House, and she traveled with both Biden and Trump in the administration. She would travel with the president, vice president, and secretary of state and set up communications for the Secret Service. Oh. And so she, before they had kids, got to travel all around the world doing that. And they wanted her to take over and run that operation, but they wanted to start a family. And when they got pregnant with the second child, they decided they needed some grandparent support. So we're happy as heck to have them back.
I can relate very well to that. Yeah, that's great. Anything else you'd like to share?
Just that, you know, I've a long history in public service, and I really want to make sure that all the kids that are growing up here today have a chance to live the American dream here in Vermont. And so, as a person who's worked in the trades, one of the things I talk about are the opportunities for young people to get into the trades. When I go on a job, the majority of the people there are my age, not my kids' age. We've missed a whole generation. And I know tradespeople that are making well into the six figures. They're not low-paying jobs anymore. There's a huge opportunity. Use the tech centers. There's a great new construction academy over in Winooski that private industry set up because they need construction workers so badly. There's a whole bunch of great businesses in Vermont that a high school kid can go right into the business and get on-the-job apprenticeship training. So I would just say to our young people around the community, this is a great opportunity because they can go to work for one of those companies and they can work for them for the rest of their life, or they can start up their own business in a few years like I did and be an entrepreneur. And I've always stayed small. Some of my friends grew their businesses and have tons of employees and workers. There's massive opportunities in the trades, and that's what I'd tell our young people is if you don't think you want to go to a four-year college, look into the trades.
In fact, there's a four-year college opening up, hopefully in Montpelier, that will focus mainly on engineering
yes.
and developing technical skills.
Another wonderful opportunity and very needed around the state.
Yep. John Rogers, Lieutenant Governor, it is so good to have you here. And whatever happens as far as the election is concerned, I hope this is not the last time we will meet.
I'm happy to come back anytime. It has been a wonderful conversation, and I thank you very much, sir.
It's been great having you. Take care now.
Thank you.
I hope that you'll join us next month when we will have Molly Gray, former Lieutenant Governor, who is running for that office again, with us. In the meantime, be blessed and be good and be bold in your representation of who you are and what you represent in this state. Look forward to seeing you again next month.
Let's talk.
About our hopes and dreams, beyond the reach it seems.
Let's talk.
Confess I live in hell. I failed to fall in scheme. Maybe we can find a pathway forward or a clue. So we may together be a symbiotic harmony where I can talk to you, you can talk to me.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's talk.